A man stands alone in the war room. His cigar burns slowly, smoke curling into the dim light. Outside, the bombs fall on London, shaking the very ground. His words, firm, unyielding, will soon ignite a nation's spirit. We shall never surrender. But before the world knew Winston Churchill as the roaring voice of defiance, he was a boy, a dreamer, a soldier, a writer, and a politician who faced failure after failure. This is the story of how one man's stubborn willpower reshaped the destiny of the world. Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill was not born into obscurity. He came into the world on November 30th, 1874, at Blenheim Palace, surrounded by privilege and expectation. Yet even from birth, he stood at the crossroads of fortune and struggle. His father, Lord Randolph Churchill, was a prominent politician. His mother, Jenny Jerome, an American socialite of dazzling beauty and ambition. Young Winston was destined for prominence, but not without enduring hardship, doubt, and ridicule. His life would stretch across the greatest upheavals of modern times. From the twilight of the British Empire to the dawn of the atomic age, Churchill's journey mirrors the turbulence of the 20th century itself. The Britain of Churchill's youth was a land of rigid class structures, a vast empire, and a society struggling to adapt to the Industrial Revolution. Technology was racing ahead: steam, rail, electricity, but politics and social equality lagged behind. For a child like Winston, born into the aristocracy, expectations were suffocating. Yet he was no prodigy. At Harrow School, his grades were poor. Teachers scolded him for carelessness, for stubbornness. He showed brilliance only in history and English, where his love for words first revealed itself. While other boys excelled in mathematics or Latin, Winston dreamed of battles, of great men leading nations through storms of fire. His father, Lord Randolph, was both inspiration and torment. A rising star in politics, he seemed to Winston like a distant thundercloud, powerful, intimidating, and ultimately out of reach. Their relationship was strained. Randolph dismissed his son as unlikely to succeed. When Winston entered Sandhurst, the Royal Military Academy, it was almost an act of defiance. I will prove myself, he thought, with action, if not with intellect. As a young cavalry officer, Churchill sought adventure at every turn. He traveled to Cuba to witness combat. He rode with the Malacan Field Force on the northwest frontier of India, where tribal warriors tested Britain's strength. In Sudan, at the Battle of Omdurman, he charged with the 21st Lancers, pistol in hand, narrowly escaping death. But Churchill was not merely a soldier, he was a storyteller. He wrote vivid accounts of these campaigns, blending fact and flair. His dispatches and books, sharp, colorful, unapologetically bold, made his name known in drawing rooms and Parliament alike. He was crafting his legend, word by word, shot by shot. Yet even with early fame, Winston was haunted by insecurity. His speech was halting, his lisp mocked. His political ambitions seemed audacious, but he pressed on. Driven by what he called his black dog, a shadow of depression, Churchill fought it with ceaseless work, words, and willpower. The philosophical underpinnings of his character emerged here: a belief in the strength of the individual, the necessity of courage, and the supreme value of freedom. He admired the great men of history, Napoleon, Caesar, Marlborough, and longed to stand among them. But history would not grant him that place easily. The young Churchill entered Parliament in 1900, a conservative at first, then dramatically switching to the Liberal Party. He earned praise as an orator, but made powerful enemies. Some saw him as brilliant, others as reckless. He rose swiftly, then stumbled. His decision-making during World War I, particularly at Gallipoli, would nearly destroy his career. But that moment, that trial, comes later. For now, Churchill was still the restless adventurer, the soldier-turned-politician, a man searching for his stage. The world was changing fast, and soon catastrophe would arrive to test him like never before. By the time the 1930s dawned, Winston Churchill was a man in political exile. Once First Lord of the Admiralty, the Gallipoli disaster had shattered his career. Though he had clawed his way back into government in the 1920s, by the next decade he was dismissed as a relic, eccentric, out of touch, too obsessed with military matters. But Churchill saw what others refused to see. Across the Channel, Adolf Hitler was rising. His speeches thundered with promises of revenge, conquest, and racial supremacy. In Britain, many politicians clung to appeasement, desperate to avoid another great war. Churchill, however, studied the storm clouds. He read Hitler's Mein Kampf with alarm. He examined Germany's rapid rearmament, the Luftwaffe's growth, the menace of tanks rolling across Europe. And he shouted warnings. Warnings the establishment dismissed as hysteria. He was ridiculed in Parliament, mocked in newspapers. One cartoon showed him as a lonely alarmist, shaking a fist at the sky while everyone else picnicked below. Yet history would soon vindicate him. In 1939, the storm broke. Hitler invaded Poland, and Britain was once again at war. Suddenly, Churchill was called back, this time as First Lord of the Admiralty once more. The Navy welcomed him with a famous signal, "Winston is back." But Britain's leadership faltered. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, architect of appeasement, lost the people's trust as disaster after disaster struck. By May 1940, with France collapsing under the German blitzkrieg, Chamberlain resigned. Only one man, controversial, fiery, unrelenting, was acceptable to lead. King George VI summoned Winston Churchill to form a government. Churchill became prime minister at the darkest hour. Britain stood alone, with the Nazi war machine dominating Europe. Many expected him to sue for peace. Instead, Churchill's voice roared with defiance. "I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat." His speeches electrified the nation. They were not empty words, they were lifelines. In June 1940, as the Battle of France ended in disaster, he declared, "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall never surrender." In August, during the Battle of Britain, as Spitfires soared against the Luftwaffe, he honored the pilots with immortal words. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. But Churchill was not just a master of words. He was a strategist, restless and demanding. He forged alliances with President Franklin Roosevelt of the United States, laying the groundwork for Lend-Lease vital supplies that kept Britain alive. Later, he traveled to Moscow, meeting Joseph Stalin, forming an uneasy alliance with the Soviet Union against Hitler. Yet his decisions were not without controversy. He ordered the bombing of the French fleet at Mers el-Kebir to prevent it from falling into German hands, killing former allies. He sanctioned relentless bombing raids on Germany. His critics accused him of ruthlessness, of clinging to empire while the world burned. But Churchill believed survival demanded iron resolve. And then came 1941. Hitler turned east, invading the Soviet Union. Later that year, Japan struck Pearl Harbor, and America entered the war. For Churchill, this was salvation. "We have won the war," he whispered to an aide upon hearing the news. The global alliance he had envisioned was now real. Fade to silence, then faint echo of bombs. But even as Britain stood resilient, the struggle was far from over. The next years would test Churchill's leadership to the breaking point through victories, defeats, and the weight of millions of lives depending on his choices. The war had reached its terrible height. By 1942, Britain had survived the Blitz, but the empire was bleeding. In North Africa, Rommel's Afrika Korps threatened Egypt. In the Atlantic, German U-boats stalked merchant convoys, starving Britain of supplies. The weight of the world pressed on Churchill's shoulders. He often worked late into the night, pacing the halls of 10 Downing Street with a cigar and glass of whiskey. His health was faltering, heart strain, exhaustion, black moods, but his determination never cracked. "I have not become the king's first minister," he told one aide, "to preside over the liquidation of the British Empire." The turning point began with El Alamein in late 1942. General Montgomery's forces, backed by Churchill's stubborn resolve, struck a decisive blow against Rommel. Churchill declared, "Before Alamein, we never had a victory. After Alamein, we never had a defeat." The tide was shifting. Then came Stalingrad in the east, where the Soviet Union bled the Wehrmacht dry. In the Pacific, American forces began their island-hopping campaign against Japan. Churchill's vision of a global alliance was finally grinding down the Axis powers. In 1943, Churchill traveled to meet Roosevelt and Stalin at the Tehran Conference. Photographs show the three leaders, the Big Three, sitting together, shaping the fate of the post-war world. Churchill pushed for a Mediterranean strategy, Roosevelt pressed for the invasion of France, Stalin demanded a second front. The tension was immense, yet the alliance held. By June 6, 1944, D-Day, the gamble was underway. Operation Overlord launched as Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy. Churchill longed to be on the ships himself, but his staff forbade it. From London, he followed every report with anxious intensity. When the beaches were secured, he wept. Europe's liberation had begun. In August, Paris was freed. In 1945, Allied troops pushed into Germany. As the Red Army closed on Berlin, Churchill's mind turned to the future. Victory was certain, but what kind of world would follow? May 8, 1945, Victory in Europe Day, Churchill appeared before jubilant crowds. He raised his fingers in the iconic V for victory sign. The world hailed him as the savior of Britain, the man who defied Hitler, the bulldog of democracy. But history is cruel in its timing. Even as he basked in triumph, Britain turned against him. In July 1945, the Labour Party swept the general election, ousting Churchill from office. The war hero was sent home by the very people he had led through fire. Churchill accepted defeat with grace, but privately he was crushed. "They have cast me out," he told his wife Clementine, "and I am so tired." He retreated to Chartwell, his country estate, painting, writing, and brooding. Yet the world had not heard the last of Winston Churchill. The war was over, but Winston Churchill's story was far from finished. Though cast aside in 1945, his voice still echoed across the world. Britain was weary, devastated, and eager for change. But history had not yet closed Churchill's chapter. In 1946, at Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri, Churchill delivered one of his most famous post-war speeches. He warned that an iron curtain had descended across Europe, dividing East from West. Once again, he was the lonely prophet, sounding the alarm about Soviet expansion. This time, the world listened. His words helped frame the early Cold War, urging America and Britain to stand firm against communism. Though out of power, Churchill remained an icon. In 1951, he returned to office as Prime Minister, older, frailer, yet still determined. His second term was less dramatic than his first. He focused on maintaining Britain's global influence, managing a shrinking empire, and nurturing ties with the United States. He saw himself as a guardian of Western civilization in a dangerous new age. But time could not be defied. His health declined, strokes weakened him, and by 1955 he stepped down, finally conceding to age. "I am ready to meet my maker," he once remarked. "Whether my maker is prepared for the great ordeal of meeting me is another matter." His humor, sharp until the end, remained his shield. Churchill devoted his later years to writing and painting. His massive 6-volume work, The Second World War, not only recounted history but shaped how generations would remember it. For his mastery of language, he received the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1953. Few war leaders had ever wielded both sword and pen with such power. On January 24, 1965, Winston Churchill died at the age of 90. Britain mourned as never before. His funeral was the largest state occasion since that of Queen Victoria. Leaders from across the globe gathered in London. Along the Thames, cranes bowed in salute as his coffin passed by. Millions watched, silent and reverent, as Britain bid farewell to the man who had refused to surrender. Churchill's legacy is vast, complicated, and enduring. To some, he is the heroic lion who saved democracy from the jaws of fascism. To others, he remains a man of contradictions, an imperialist, a hardliner, a man whose flaws were as towering as his triumphs. But what cannot be denied is the force of his will, the power of his words, and the indelible mark he left on the 20th century. From his youth at Blenheim Palace to his lonely years in political wilderness, from the fire of the Blitz to the triumph of victory, Winston Churchill lived a life that was larger than life itself. His speeches still echo, not just in history books, but in the human spirit. They remind us of the power of resilience, courage, and unyielding defiance in the face of darkness. And as long as free nations stand, the bulldog spirit of Winston Churchill will never truly fade. If this story moved you, consider sharing it. History is not just about dates and battles, it's about people, choices, and courage in the darkest hours. Subscribe for more untold journeys of leaders who shaped our world.